It's time to settle this debate once and for all. Is Islam a religion of peace?
And faith. I do follow a religion in which 113 out of the 114 chapters of the Quran begins by introducing the God of Islam as a God of mercy and compassion. I would not have it any other way. I don't follow a religion which introduces my God to me as a God of war, as some kind of Greek God of wrath, as a God of hate and injustice. Not at all.
I have been ordered to fight people until they testify that there is no God but Allah, and only then will their lives and their property be saved from me.
A mixture of just cherry-picked quotes, facts and figures, self-serving, selective, a farrago of distortions, misrepresentations, misinterpretations, misquotations.
Nabeel Qureshi disagrees.
Sahih Muslim that he has come to expel the Jews and Christians from the Arabian Peninsula and will not leave any but Muslims, polytheists. Chapter 9, verse 5, slay the infidels wherever you find them, lay siege to them, take them captive. Chapter 9, verse 29, fight the Jews and Christians until they pay you the poll tax and they feel subdued. Why? Chapter 9, verse 33, Islam has been made to prevail over every religion. And started happening. And that's why you don't hear the phrase, Islam is a religion of peace, until the 20th century.
In this video, Mehdi Hasan and Nabeel Qureshi engage in a thought-provoking debate, presenting their arguments for and against the motion. Mehdi supports the motion, arguing that Islam is a religion of peace, while Nabeel opposes it, claiming that Islam promotes violence. Let's dive into this stimulating discussion and explore both perspectives on this contentious issue.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Assalamu alaikum. Lovely to see you all here tonight. We are having a very entertaining night, are we not, with some very interesting things being said from the other side of the house tonight. Let me begin by saying, as a Muslim, as a representative of Islam, I would consider myself an ambassador for Islam, a believer in Islam, a follower of Islam and its prophet. So in that capacity, let me begin by apologizing to Anne-Marie for the Bali bombings. I apologize for the role of my religion and me and my people, for the killing of Theo van Gogh, for 7/7. Yes, that was all of us. That was Islam, that was Muslims, that was the Quran. I mean, astonishing claims to make in the very first speech tonight, on a day like today, where the Conservative Prime Minister of the United Kingdom is having to come out and point out that these kind of views are anathema. And I believe you're trying to stand for the Labour Party to become an MP in Brighton. If you do, and you make these comments, I'm guessing you'll have the whip withdrawn from you, but then again, UKIP's on the rise, they'll take you, the BNP, they might have something to say about your views.
This is what Mehdi Hasan always does.
By the way, just on a factual point, since we heard a lot about the second speaker, about how backward we Muslims all are, on a factual point, you said that Islam was born in Saudi Arabia. Islam was born in 610 AD. Saudi Arabia was born in 1932 AD. So you were only 1,322 years off. Not bad? Not bad start there. Talking of maths, by the way, a man named Al-Khwarizmi was one of the greatest mathematicians of all time, a Muslim, worked in the golden age of Islam. He's the guy who came up with not just algebra, but algorithms. Without algorithms, you wouldn't have laptops. Without laptops, Daniel Johnson tonight wouldn't have been able to print out his speech in which he came to berate us Muslims for holding back the advance and intellectual achievements of the West, which all happened without any contribution from anyone else other than the Judeo-Christian people of Europe. In fact, Daniel David Levering, the author of the Pulitzer Prize-winning historian and author of The Golden Crucible, points out that there would be no Renaissance, there would be no Reformation in Europe without the role played by Ibn Sina and Ibn Rushd and some of the great Muslim theologians, philosophers, scientists in bringing Greek texts to Europe. As for this being our university, I will leave that to the imagination as to who is our and who is there. I studied here too. An astonishing set of speeches so far making this case tonight. A mixture of just cherry-picked quotes, facts and figures, self-serving, selective, a farrago of distortions, misrepresentations, misinterpretations, misquotations. Daniel talked about my article in the New Statesman, which got me a lot of flack, where I talked about the anti-Semitism that is prevalent in some parts of the Muslim community, which indeed it is. Of course, I didn't say in that piece that it was caused by the religion of Islam. In fact, modern anti-Semitism in the Middle East was imported from, finish the sentence, Judeo-Christian Europe, where I believe some certainly bad things happened to the Jewish people. In fact, Tom Friedman, Jewish-American columnist in the New York Times, told me in this very chamber last week that he believed, had Muslims been running Europe in the 1940s, 6 million extra Jews would still be alive today. So I'm not going to take lessons in anti-Semitism from someone who's here to defend the Judeo-Christian values of a continent that murdered 6 million Jews. Moving swiftly on. Yes.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm about to make that point. No, I'm about to make that point. You're right. I agree with you. I agree with you 110%. That is my point. I don't think Europe is evil or bad. I'm a very proud European. I don't want to judge Europe on that basis, but if we're going to play this gutter game where we pull out the Bali bombing and we pull out examples of anti-Semitism in the Islamic community, then of course I'm going to come back and say, well, hold on. I mean, look, let's be very clear. Daniel here was a last-minute replacement for Douglas Murray, who had to pull out. And Douglas and I have a well-documented differences, but to be fair to Douglas, as to be fair to Anne-Marie and to Peter, atheists. Atheists see all religions as evil, violent, threatening. What the problem I have with Daniel's speech is that Daniel comes here to run this robust defense of Christianity, forgetting that his fellow Christians, people who said they were acting in the name of Jesus, gave us the Crusades, the Spanish Inquisition, the anti-Jewish pogroms, European colonialism in Africa and Asia, the Lord's Resistance Army in Uganda, not to mention countless arson and bomb attacks on abortion clinics in the United States of America to this very day. I would like a little bit of humility from Daniel first before he begins lecturing other communities and other faiths on violence, terror, and intolerance. But, no thank you. Some water. But I would say this, to address the gentleman's very valid point here, I'm not going to play that game. I don't actually believe that Christianity is a religion of violence and hate because of what the LRA does in Uganda or what Crusaders did to Jews and Muslims in Jerusalem when they took back the city in the 12th or 13th or whatever century it was. I believe that Christianity, like Islam, like pretty much every mainstream religion, is based on love and compassion and faith. I do follow a religion in which 113 out of the 114 chapters of the Quran begins by introducing the God of Islam as a God of mercy and compassion. I would not have it any other way. I don't follow a religion which introduces my God to me as a God of war, as some kind of Greek God of wrath, as a God of hate and injustice. Not at all. As Adam pointed out, you go through the Quran and you see the mercy and the love and the justice. And yes, you have verses that refer to warfare and violence. Of course it does. This is not a motion about pacifism. I'm not here to argue that Islam is a pacifistic faith. It is not. Islam allows military action, violence in certain limited contexts. And yes, a minority of Muslims do take it out of that context. But is it religious? We talked about Woolwich. Daniel and Anne-Marie have suggested that it's definitely religion that's behind all of this. Well, actually, what I find so amusing tonight is we're having a debate about Islam. And the opposition tonight have come forward. We have a graduate in law, a graduate in modern history, a graduate in chemistry. And, you know, I admire all of their intellects and their abilities, but we don't have anyone who's actually an expert on Islam, a scholar of Islam, a historian of Islam, a speaker of Arabic, even a terrorism expert or a security expert or a pollster, let alone to talk about what Muslims believe or think. Instead, we have people coming here, putting forward these views, putting forward these sweeping opinions. Listen to Professor Robert Pape of the University of Chicago, one of America's leading terrorism experts, who, unlike our esteemed opposition tonight, studied every single case of suicide terrorism between 1980 and 2005, 315 cases in total. And he concluded, and I quote, "There is little connection between suicide terrorism and Islamic fundamentalism or any of the world's religions. Rather, what nearly all suicide terrorist attacks have in common is a specific secular and strategic goal to compel modern democracies to withdraw military forces from territory that the terrorists consider to be their homeland."
Hasan accuses the opposition of cherry-picking quotes from the Quran, but let's not forget that he does the same thing. He selectively quotes verses that support his argument while conveniently ignoring others that might contradict it. It's a bit hypocritical, don't you think? If we want to truly understand the teachings of Islam, we need to consider the entire context, not just the verses that align with our preconceived notions. Another point he brings up is the lack of expertise from the opposition. But wait a minute, Mehdi Hasan himself is not a scholar or historian of Islam. So why does he claim to have all the answers? It's important to question the authority and credentials of those making arguments. Though he is a Muslim, that doesn't just make him an expert in this situation. We should seek knowledge from qualified experts who have dedicated their lives to studying and understanding Islam. Now, while Hasan argues that Islam is a peaceful religion, let's not forget that the founder of Islam, Muhammad, was not a man of peace like Jesus Christ. There are fundamental differences between their teachings and actions. Jesus taught love, forgiveness, and turning the other cheek, while Muhammad engaged in military campaigns and conquests. These differences cannot be ignored when discussing the peaceful nature of a religion. So, as we continue this discussion, let's critically examine the arguments being presented and seek the truth about the nature of Islam. It's not about demonizing or generalizing, but about understanding the historical and theological context. Only then can we make informed decisions and engage in meaningful dialogue.
And the irony is, when we talk about terrorism, the irony is that the opposition and the Muslim terrorists, the Al-Qaeda types, actually have one thing in common, because they both believe that Islam is a warlike, violent religion. They both agree on that. They have everything in common. Osama bin Laden would be nodding along to everything he's heard tonight from the opposition side. He agrees with them. The problem is that mainstream Muslims don't. The majority of Muslims around the world don't. In fact, a gentleman here started quoting all sorts of polls. Gallup carried out the biggest poll of Muslims around the world, of 50,000 Muslims in 35 countries. 93% of Muslims rejected 9/11 and suicide attacks. And of the 7% who didn't, they all, when polled and focus grouped, cited political reasons for their support for violence, not religious reasons. And as for Islamic scholars and what they say, well, Daniel talks about our University of Oxford. We'll go down to Oxford Centre for Islamic Studies, get hold of a man named Sheikh Afifi al-Akiti, who is a massively well-credentialed and well-respected Islamic scholar, who has studied across the world, who in the days after 7/7 published a fatwa denouncing terrorism in the name of Islam, calling for the protection of all non-combatants at all times, and describing suicide bombings as an innovation with no basis in Islamic law. Go and listen to Sheikh Tahir al-Qadri, one of Pakistan's most famous Islamic scholars, who published a 600-page fatwa condemning the killing of all innocents and all suicide bombings unconditionally without any ifs or buts. There's nothing new here. This is mainstream Islam, mainstream scholarship, which has said this for years. You don't go out and kill people willy-nilly in the high street or anywhere else, on a bus or a mall, based on verses of the Quran that you cherry-pick without any context, any understanding, any interpretation, or any commentary.
Point of information.
Please.
What about stoning of women, for example, in such
Well,
It doesn't happen apparently.
I didn't say it doesn't happen at all. I never said it didn't happen. I don't blame Islam. Yes, it's a very good point. And a lot of us are campaigning against that. And we're campaigning against it in the name of Islam. We're campaigning against it in the name of various interpretations of Islam. Anne-Marie comes and scares us with her talk of Sharia law. I would like to see the book of Sharia law. It doesn't exist. People argue over what Sharia law is. And you empower the extremists by saying there is only one version. You empower them all. I don't believe you took any interruptions, Anne-Marie, so I think you should stay there for a moment.
Several countries.
Here's what we're dealing with. Here's what we're dealing with. I took your point. Here we are dealing with a 1400-year-old global religion, followed by 1.6 billion people in every corner of the world, a quarter of humanity, of all backgrounds, cultures, ethnicities. And yet the opposition tonight wants to generalize, stereotype, smear in order to desperately win this debate. And here's my question, if we're going to generalize and smear. People say yesterday's bombers, and we've got to be careful, there's a trial going on, were yesterday's attackers, motivated by Islam? Big debate. I don't believe they were. Let's say they were. Let's say Faisal Shahzad, the Times Square bomber, was motivated by Islam. Let's assume, for sake of argument, that Richard Reeves, the shoe bomber, was motivated by Islam. If Islam is responsible for these killings, if Islam is what is motivating these people, and Islam is therefore not a religion of peace, a religion of war, then ask yourself this question: why aren't the rest of us doing it? Why is it such a tiny minority of Muslims are interpreting their religion in the way that the opposition claim they are? Let's assume there are 16,000 suicide bombers in the world. There aren't. Let's assume there are for the sake of argument. That's 0.001% of the Muslim population globally. What about the other 99.99% of Muslims who the opposition tonight either ignore or smear? The reality is that the rest of us aren't blowing ourselves up tonight. The reality is that the opposition came here tonight not worried about the fact that me and Adam might pull open our jackets and blow ourselves up tonight because we're followers of a warlike warrior religion which wants to take over Europe and Daniel's university. The issue is this. Unless the opposition can tell us tonight, and Peter Atkins is here, one of our great atheist intellectuals, can tell us tonight, can answer this question tonight, why don't the vast majority of Muslims around the world behave as violently and aggressively as a tiny minority of politically motivated extremists? Then they might as well give up and stop pretending they have anything relevant to say about Islam or Muslims as a whole.
All right, let's dive into this section of the debate where Mehdi Hasan presents his arguments. Now, he starts off by talking about the importance of not generalizing and stereotyping Muslims. And while that's a valid point, it's interesting to note that Hasan himself makes generalizations about the opposition and their views on Islam. It seems like a bit of a double standard, doesn't it? Hasan also emphasizes that only a small minority of Muslims are violent extremists. But here's the thing. Even if it's a minority, their actions have had a significant impact and caused harm to many people. It's important not to dismiss the impact that even a small group can have. Another point that caught my attention is Hasan's claim that his interpretation of Islam is the correct one. But wait a minute, how can he be so sure? Islam is a diverse religion with different interpretations, and it's important to acknowledge that there may be multiple valid perspectives. Now let's talk about smearing the opposition. Hasan accuses them of smearing and stereotyping Muslims, but he himself resorts to personal attacks and insults against the opposition. It's a bit hypocritical, isn't it? We should focus on addressing the arguments rather than attacking individuals. One thing that stands out in Hasan's argument is his lack of self-reflection. He seems to completely dismiss the possibility that Islam may have any role in violent extremism, attributing it solely to political motivations and external factors. It's important for him to engage in more self-reflection and consider alternative perspectives. Lastly, Hasan downplays the role of religion in violent extremism, attributing it more to political factors. While politics may play a part, it's hard to deny that religion can shape beliefs and actions. It's an important aspect to consider in understanding the root causes of extremism.
Ladies and gentlemen, let me just say this to you. Think about what the opposite of this motion is. If you vote no tonight, think about what you're saying the opposite of this motion is. That Islam isn't a religion of peace, it's a religion of war, of violence, of terror, of aggression. That the people who follow Islam, me, my wife, my retired parents, my 6-year-old child, that 1.8 million of your fellow British residents and citizens, that 1.6 billion people across the world, your fellow human beings, are all followers, promoters, believers in a religion of violence. Do you really think that? Do you really believe that to be the case? They say that in the Oxford Union, the most famous debate was in 1933 when Adolf Hitler looked out for the result of the King and Country motion, where they voted against fighting for King and Country, and Hitler was listening out for the result. Well, tonight, 80 years on, there are two groups of people around the world who I would argue are waiting for the result of tonight's vote. There are the millions of peaceful, non-violent, law-abiding Muslims both in the UK, Europe, Asia, Africa and beyond, who see Islam as the source of their identity, as a source of spiritual fulfillment, of hope, of solace. And there are the phobes, the haters, the bigots out there who want to push the clash of civilizations, who want to divide all of us into them and us and ours and their. Ladies and gentlemen, I urge you all not to fuel the arguments of the phobes and bigots. Don't legitimize their divisions. Don't legitimize their hate. Trust those Muslims who you know, who you've met, who you hear, who don't believe in violence, who do want you to hear the peaceful message of the Quran as they believe it to be taught to the majority of Muslims, the Islam of peace and compassion and mercy, the Islam of the Quran, not of Al-Qaeda. Ladies and gentlemen, I beg to propose this motion to the House. I urge you to vote yes tonight. Thank you very much for your time.
Now let's hear the opposing view from Nabeel Qureshi, who will argue that Islam is not a religion of peace. Nabeel's background is quite unique. He was born and raised in a Muslim household, practicing Islam from a young age. However, during his college days, a conversation with a Christian friend challenged his beliefs, prompting him to question his stance as a Muslim. Seeking clarity, Nabeel prayed to Allah to reveal himself, but instead he found Jesus, which became the title of his book, Seeking Allah, Finding Jesus. This transformative experience led Nabeel to dedicate his life to sharing the gospel with others, making a profound impact on the world before his untimely passing due to cancer. Let's listen to his perspective on why he no longer believes Islam is a religion of peace.
Initially, when I encountered the violence in Islam, I said, well, this can't be the true Islam. And I, for years, would push back, arguing, no, this hadith here is unreliable. For example, Muhammad says in Sahih Muslim that he has come to expel the Jews and Christians from the Arabian Peninsula and will not leave any but Muslims. that doesn't sound like the Muhammad I knew. So I said, well, that can't be a reliable tradition. And then another tradition from Sahih Bukhari, which says, I have been ordered to fight people until they testify that there is no God but Allah, and only then will their lives and their property be saved from me. And this is from the most reliable collection of hadith, Sahih Bukhari. And so I said, no, that can't be reliable either. And as you continue, you find Muhammad beheading multiple hundreds of men at the same time. You see him distributing those men's wives and children into slavery. You see him torturing people for money. You see him, all these atrocities within Muhammad's life, and not always in defensive battles by any means, offensively as well. And so, after trying to dismiss many of these traditions, I said, well, let me piece together what's going on here, because if I dismiss all of these violent traditions, then I am basically dismissing the foundations of Islam. This is where I get my picture of Muhammad from. So looking just at the sources, what is the story? How do I reconstruct what Muhammad's life is like? And what you find when you do that, because there certainly are peaceful passages in the Quran. We can't ignore that. Like chapter 2, verse 256 of the Quran, which says there's no compulsion in religion.
And those are often the ones that are quoted in
those are
response
often
to,
the ones,
to people.
Chapter 109, which says, those of you who disbelieve, believe whatever you want and let us believe what we want. Fairly peaceful. One of the ones that's I can't say this without laughing a bit, but so abused is chapter 5, verse 32 of the Quran, which says, if you kill one person, it says if you kill all of mankind. And if you save a life, it says if you save all of mankind. When you start understanding the context, though, you realize that this is not the ultimate message of Islam. For example, that one verse, chapter 5, verse 32 of the Quran, says the first part of that verse is, it was told to the Jews. If you kill one person, it's as if you kill all mankind. If you save a life, as if you save all mankind. And we do. We find that in Tractate Sanhedrin of the Babylonian Talmud.
I see.
It's not in the Quran. It's not a teaching for Muslims. The next verse is the teaching for Muslims, which says, if anyone creates mischief in the land or strives against Allah or His messenger, crucify him or kill him.
Right, a very
cut off
different
his hands.
message.
Exactly.
Okay.
So you start getting the context. And what you find is, in the first 13 years of Muhammad's prophetic career, he lives a peaceful life. He has about 100 followers by the end of that time, not that many. Certainly doesn't have a fighting force. Most of these people are of humble means. And he doesn't fight during that time. But then he's given rule over a city. An entire city gives him the right to be arbiter. From that moment until his death, approximately 9 to 10 years, he personally participates in or deputizes 86 battles.
Right.
So that's an average of 9+ battles a year, and they culminate in intensity until the moment he dies. Chapter 9 of the Quran is the last major chapter of the Quran to have been composed, and it is the most expansively violent. This is the one that starts off by saying this is a disavowal of all the treaties we have with polytheists. Chapter 9, verse 5, slay the infidels wherever you find them, lay siege to them, take them captive. Chapter 9, verse 29, fight the Jews and Christians until they pay you the poll tax and they feel subdued. Why? Chapter 9, verse 33, Islam has been made to prevail over every religion. So, chapter 9 is the most violent. It's the culmination of the Islamic message. It's the marching orders that Muhammad leaves Muslims with, which is why when he dies, Muslims conquer 1/3 of the known world within 150 years.
Right.
These were the messages.
By the sword.
It's complex. Once again, they would tell places, if you do not convert, then you have the option to pay a tax. And if you don't pay that tax, then we will fight you.
The jizya.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it was expanding into territory. The first option people were given was conversion. The second option was paying a tax. And if that didn't happen, then it was by the sword.
And do you basically see this as effectively the modus operandi of groups like ISIS today?
Well, this has been the classical understanding of Islam up until the fall of the Ottoman Empire. No Muslim really ever had qualms with it. It's what it was, and this is the means through which Allah had given Muslims dominance around the world. And it wasn't until Muslims had to as a culture, flip the script and start playing the defensive, the victim card, which they hadn't done before. So, for example, the Crusades. Many Muslims will point to the Crusades now and say, this is another example of Christian sort of superiority complex and trying to keep us down and oppressing us. The Crusades were never even discussed in Islamic literature. There was no Muslim or Arabic word for Crusades until Christians came up with one in the 19th century.
Okay.
It just wasn't a part of the Islamic mentality until the Ottoman Empire fell, the Islamic world started losing its power, and then these discussions started happening. And that's why you don't hear the phrase, Islam is a religion of peace, until the 20th century.
That simply wasn't a phrase.
It was never said. It was never thought. That wasn't the way Muslims had thought up until that time.
All right, let's wrap up this video up as we explore Nabeel Qureshi's opposition to the idea of Islam being a religion of peace. Nabeel's journey of reevaluation and exploration led him to question the peaceful nature of Islam that he initially believed in. Now, Nabeel initially dismissed the violent traditions in Islam, but as he delved deeper into his research, he realized that he couldn't ignore these traditions without dismissing fundamental teachings of the religion. It was a challenging realization for him. Through his thorough examination of Muhammad's life and the available sources, Nabeel discovered a mix of peaceful and violent verses in the Quran. He found that while some passages conveyed messages of peace, others called for fighting and even killing those who opposed Islam. This complex nature of Islamic teachings left Nabeel with thought-provoking questions. How could a religion that claims to be peaceful also contain instructions for violence? He highlighted the contradiction that exists within Islam's teachings and challenged the notion that it is purely a religion of peace. Nabeel also shed light on the historical context of the phrase, Islam is a religion of peace. Surprisingly, he revealed that this phrase did not exist in Islamic literature until the 20th century. It emerged as a response to the declining power of the Islamic world, perhaps as a way to shape a more positive image. Nabeel's opposition to the idea of Islam as a religion of peace encourages us to critically examine not only Islam, but also our own beliefs and assumptions. It challenges us to delve deeper into the teachings and history of religions, seeking a nuanced understanding. Thank you for joining us in this section, and we look forward to continuing this journey together. May we all seek truth, love, and understanding as we navigate the complexities of faith and religion.